Newsmaker Live right here on the DBS television. My name is Timothy Paulion. We'll be together until 10 o'clock this evening, at which time we'll be concluding with the clip that peaked. Of course, later we'll be taking your calls, so please stay with the broadcast. Yesterday, St. Lucia and the rest of the world observed World Mental Health Day, and this is against the background of people suffering from depression, and of course there's been a spate of suicides on the island and people just not being able to cope with the travails and the challenges of life. We'll be focusing on this particular issue, and World Mental Health Day was observed under the theme Mental Health in the Workplace. So that is certainly a challenge that we have to deal with, that we have to focus on the relationship between workers and also the relationship between the employees and their employers. So we're hoping, as far as mental health is concerned, to have a wide-ranging discussion on this important matter. My guest this evening is consultant psychiatrist Dr. Julius Gilliard. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me.
What is the state of the nation's mental health, if you are in a position to diagnose?
Well, I wouldn't say that I am in an adequate position to diagnose because I haven't been here that long. But from what I can see, we are making huge strides. From what I can see, we are developing our mental health system because we are no longer totally concentrated around the mental hospital. We now have community mental health for a number of years now, where we have community mental health nurses who are trained. So they go overseas, get trained, and come back, go into the community, and they see those patients who are stable in the community. So the patients who are acutely ill, they would come into hospital, spend some time until they get better, and then they are sent back home, and they're treated in the community, as the WHO is trying to get patients to be more family-oriented, more community-oriented in their treatment. So they have found that patients who are treated at home tend to fare better than those who are treated in hospital. In addition, they're trying to cut down the cost to governments and society of having patients hospitalized for prolonged periods of time, which only results in a poor outcome for these patients as well.
But you returned to St. Lucia just a few months ago. But the whole discussion and the debate on the island has been, over the last few years, the discontinuation of a program where people suffering with mental health would have been treated at the community level. So as far as you know, has that program been reinstated?
Well, as far as I know, it was never discontinued. So I left here 5 years ago, and it's still in effect. Like I told you,
But has it been scaled down?
No, not that I know of. So we have community mental health nurses who go to each community on a certain day of the month, and they liaise with the doctors at the mental wellness center. And well, we have a close relationship. So they see a patient who is not well, they would call, and they would get advice whether to bring the patient in or whether to give the patient another medication and keep the patient under observation in the community, because the thrust is towards community mental health.
But community mental health, how do you explain, therefore, when you see people who are clearly not of sound mind, who are along the Castries waterfront, defecating there and so on, half naked, and they're there mingling with the citizenry, mingling with visitors, and don't you think those people run the risk of, for example, running amok, maybe coming across some weapon and then hacking somebody to death? So those things have happened before.
It has? Well, I don't know. The thing about mental health is stigma. So one of the issues we're dealing with this month, actually, like you said, is Mental Health Awareness Month. So we're trying to deal with the stigma that's attached to mental health. So just like you said, a lot of persons have the idea that mentally ill persons are dangerous. So they would see persons on the road dressed a certain way, and to them, this person looks harmful. So they become fearful.
And that individual also comes across as being harmful as well, because they're very loud. They come across as being very, very aggressive as well. We see them all the time.
So just like what you're saying, there are persons who are not mentally ill who also exhibit those behaviors, but persons are not fearful of them. So like I told you, it's the stigma attached to mental health. So persons have this idea that when somebody is mentally ill, that they are going to be hurt. And the incidences of mentally ill persons hurting somebody is very rare. It's like 10% of mentally ill persons would injure somebody, and what, 1% of the mentally ill population, of the general population, is mentally ill. So then that is a minuscule number of people who would exhibit violent behavior.
So you're saying that even people who appear to be of sound mind are also involved sometimes in violent acts.
Yes, most of the shootings and so on you hear of in St. Lucia are not by mentally ill persons. A lot of the choppings you hear of and the murders, they are not mentally ill persons.
But can't we say that those people are going through some psychological problem to be so violent?
Not necessarily. I mean, yes, I had a lecturer at school who had the idea that in his mind, to kill somebody, you cannot be of sound mind. But the argument of that is that there are persons who have different issues going on. So somebody with a severe mental illness may not have the same issues as somebody who does not. Somebody who has a personality disorder, for example. Somebody who is angered on the spur of the moment may react in anger. So that person cannot be classified as being mentally ill. So mental illness, I think because of the stigma attached to it, persons associate it with dangerousness, and that is not necessarily so.
But so therefore you're saying that it's normal, it should be seen as normal that people of unsound mind who are walking in the streets, who certainly they appear to be, well, they are unkept and so on. But those people, it's something that should be allowed.
Okay, so Timothy, one thing, how would you determine if somebody is of unsound mind? Because somebody of unsound mind is somebody who has no touch with reality. That's what unsound mind means. They have lost touch with reality. And somebody who's walking on the streets has not bathed for a few days, has his hair or her hair is not combed, smelly, and talking to himself, that this person might have pretty good control of their mental faculties, but the person just chooses to dress that way and to behave in that way.
But the only thing is because they have unsound mind.
No, they're not
of
unsound mind. They may have another
mental issue. They're carrying themselves in that way.
No, man. They may have another mental issue that probably affects their decision-making capabilities, but they may not be of unsound mind. The words of unsound mind speaks of something totally different. Speaks of somebody who has totally lost touch with reality, and they're not aware of what they're doing and what's happening around them.
So if that person is they have not lost the touch with reality, why would they be sometimes exposing themselves as well in the streets?
Because some persons choose to do that. The same way you have persons who flash. They not have unsound mind, but they choose to behave that way.
So then why are some people more vulnerable to that kind of behavior than others? Because that is seen, as far as the society is concerned, to be unacceptable behavior.
Okay, so the reason I notice people tend to think that way about mentally ill persons is because of history. So throughout history, what happened is that persons who were seen as behaving differently, quote unquote, they would be locked away from society because the authorities didn't want persons to be disruptive to the society. So anybody who they saw as being disruptive, they would be locked away and treated in any manner. But if you look at history as well, the Indians who were here before us, they actually treated mental illness in a totally different manner. They would allow the persons to roam around, and they would be fed by the community. They would be fruits and so on would be placed at certain places where they could feed themselves and so on, and they were kept well, and they tended to fare better. But then with the Europeans coming here and instilling the mental their culture on us, then you'll find that after slavery began and so on, they started building the asylums, and persons who they saw as lunatics, that's what they call them, they were sent away to these asylums and treated in any manner that the authorities at the time saw. So this culture has continued, where that persons who are seen as different, are behaving in a different manner in society, are rejected. They are seen as outcasts. The persons avoid them, and persons tend to view them in a negative manner.
Can those people be reformed? Can they be medicated, given treatment,
Yes,
and treated and so on.
that's what the mental health system is all about. So,
but is there a cure for mental health?
No, mental health.
Or mental illness?
Well, mental illness depends on the illness. So there's a large, there's a huge number of mental illnesses, from those that are severe to those that are mild. So the more severe ones tend to be more chronic and debilitating than the milder ones. So things like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and the likes, they tend to be chronic and relapsing. Okay, so they remit for a small while, for a small period, and then they relapse, whether the patient is on medication or not. Understand? So what they found is that community mental health tends to result in a better outcome for those persons, because the persons would be treated not as patients but as humans. So before a lot of the mental treatment used to dehumanize the patients. So it's just like you said earlier on, you see somebody walking on the road and they're stripping themselves and so on. So that person is not seen as a human being, but as a mentally ill person or patient. And so that person is cast away and locked away and treated in whatever manner that the society sees fit. But what mental health is now trying to do is to humanize mental illness. So persons could see that these people are people. They are real people who had families or have families, who had lives before they became mentally ill, and who can contribute to society in a meaningful way when they are well.
Why is there a role for the relatives of those people? Because very often people who are suffering with mental illnesses, they are ostracized and they're seen as a burden and a responsibility for the state and not the family.
Well, actually, dealing with somebody who's mentally ill is burdensome. And I mean, my heart goes out to any family who's dealing with somebody who's mentally ill, because it's a tremendous challenge. Because they have to deal with somebody who is mentally ill, who will exhibit behaviors which they see as not acceptable, they see as disruptive, and in some cases they see as dangerous. And then they have to deal with these persons, in addition, not believing they are mentally ill and refusing to take medication and refusing to seek treatment. So it's a tremendous burden for any family who has a person who is mentally ill. And a lot of them go through what we call burnout. So they become mentally exhausted, and after a while they just cannot deal with the situation anymore. And they tend to cast out these persons, making the situation even worse for that person. So that person eventually either ends up on the street, in prison, or as a chronic patient at a wellness center.
But how should they deal with that problem?
Well, persons tend, like I told you, it's a tremendous problem, and it would take somebody with a lot of patience to deal with that kind of situation. A lot of the times the family members themselves have issues going through. So they may have their own mental or other issues going through. And then to have this person who's very disruptive and every now and again disrupting their lives, and eventually it can be mentally exhausting. But I know as well families who have been patient and who have been supportive, and no matter what the situation, they support their relatives and they're there for them. And it may take years before the person finally settles and begins to accept what's happening and begins to become more cooperative and so on. But it is a tremendous issue to deal with, and difficulty.
Very often family members, when they have relatives who are suffering with mental problems and they are unruly, they normally would either seek assistance from medical facilities, the person like yourself, psychiatrists and so on. In most cases, they turn to the police, and that's when things turn awry, things turn deadly. Is there some kind of protocol in place whereby the police would act in a particular manner so that in their interaction with persons of unsound mind, they do not kill that person in the process, because it has happened in the past, and very often it has happened?
Okay, so like I told you earlier on, I've been here for a couple months, so I'm not too familiar with protocols. Mm-hmm. But from what I have encountered, when there is an issue with a mentally ill person, if the family goes to the police, they do give them assistance, and I must say kudos must go out to the police, because they assist in ways that I cannot describe.
But let me ask you though, what should be the approach, the ideal approach?
The approach should be that before a patient is picked up, that the family gets a request from a doctor. So if the person is a known mentally ill patient, they would come to the mental wellness center, get a request, say my son is or my daughter is acting out and I need assistance from the police. And we would send a form to the police.
Can they also call?
No, they have to come for the form because the police would only go when they have the form. If it's a new patient or the patient is really violent, then they go on the spur of the moment. And if it's a new patient, they would take the patient to a general facility first to get another doctor to see before sending the patient up to the wellness center. If it's a known patient, they would bring the patient directly to the emergency room at the wellness center, and where that person would be evaluated by a psychiatrist and then admitted.
Okay. Knowing where to turn to for help. People, especially people who do not have family members or do not have a history of suffering with mental illness, and they're suffering with depression. Some people tell you, well, turn to God, read the Bible, speak to a friend. What are the options available to those people? What can they do? What should they do?
Well, all of these are options, but in addition, we have in St. Lucia things that persons, I don't think they're really aware of the choices they have. So a lot of persons see the mental wellness center as a place where quote-unquote mad people go. And I just want to let the public know that the wellness center is a mental hospital. So it is a place where all mental illness is treated, not just persons who have schizophrenia or bipolar and the like. Persons with depression can be treated adequately at the wellness center. Persons with anxiety issues can be treated adequately at the wellness center. Even persons with personality disorders that are becoming a bit disturbing to their function can be treated at the wellness center. So maybe in the past, we were not adequately staffed. So maybe somebody would go and it was mainly medications we would deal with. But as far as I know currently, we have a more rounded team. So we have psychiatrists available. We have social workers available. We have psychologists available. And that team, together with the nurses at the wellness center, we meet each patient's needs accordingly. So if somebody comes and says, I'm feeling very anxious at work and I cannot concentrate and it's affecting my function, I think they're going to fire me, then the person comes in and they're evaluated by a psychiatrist who refers them accordingly. So if the person is severely anxious, so severely anxious that they would need medication, then they would put on medication. If they're only mildly anxious, then they are referred to a psychologist who can counsel them, who can let them go through a period of therapy which can improve their symptoms and they can get back to their functioning as before.
Considering how we are nurtured in St. Lucia, if you're going through any such problem on the job, very often somebody will tell you that it's obia. And somehow somebody is trying to get you fired or to get your job and so on. How do you deal with that when, for example, you as a trained medical official, you would be looking at other aspects with regard to treating that person as opposed to looking at it from the perspective of obia?
Well, actually, I never discard any aspect. So when I see somebody, the main thing I look at is...
So you're saying obia could be a possibility?
Like I said, I never discard any options. So when I look at somebody, I look at the level of functioning. So somebody is coming to me with symptoms. How the symptoms are caused does not change the fact that the person has symptoms. So if somebody is coming to me and they're hearing voices, and the voices are telling them that this person is putting obia on you, I'm not discarding that, but the person is hearing voices which are affecting their relationship with somebody or their social functioning. So this person would be counseled accordingly. So we would sit down and speak and have a little back and forth. And then in the end, we would agree that, okay, this is affecting my functioning, and I do not want my functioning to be affected because I don't want to lose my job. And so what are the options? So the options are, should I take medication to see if these voices can go away, so that whatever this is telling me about this person putting obia on me, I could not hear it because it's disturbing me. Maybe a change of environment so that whoever the person thinks is disturbing them can assist. Maybe therapy, where the person can go down deep into why they all of a sudden hearing voices and what may be causing it. Understand? So I look at functioning, and my job is to try to get the patient back to the level of functioning that they were at before they started having the symptoms. So this is always my number one option when I discuss treatment with a patient. And the OBR thing, yes, they could come with all the issues that they have, but we're trying to deal with getting you back on your feet.
Okay, but how many people really understand, especially in the St. Lucia context, the St. Lucia environment, that there is help, that there is need to go to a counselor, there's need to go to a psychologist? The same way when if you have a broken arm and so on, you'd go to a surgeon.
So the number of people who are aware of it, I'm not sure because I haven't been here for long, but we are now having this drive. I mean, luckily, I just came back and it's Mental Health Awareness Month. So I'm able to make a lot of input because stuff that I just learned, so I still have it fresh in my head and so on. So what we're trying to do is get persons aware, because I realized a lot of persons are not aware of the options. So for example, we did a symposium at one of the hotels, and the persons had no idea there was a suicide hotline. So we had to educate, and we had to let them know what the process is and what's going to take place when they come and what to expect afterwards and so on. So we're now trying to educate persons. We're now trying to go out into the community, different business places, to let persons know that help is available. So either the mental wellness center, come see a doctor or psychologist, or in case of persons who are going through overwhelming emotion, and they now seeing suicide as an option, you have the national helpline, which is 203, which they can call, and they can get into contact with somebody who can lead them down the path to making that option less attractive.
But how you change the people's mindset, especially in the workplace, to let them know that there are people who might be going through bad patches, and depression could be the result, to the extent that they could contemplate committing suicide. I imagine that some people, including managers, supervisors, etc., could be very unsympathetic and say, this is not a mental health institution. This is the workplace. You're here to perform a particular duty, perform a particular task, and to be productive. Because I think that's a new situation that we are experiencing right now in terms of being exposed to the possibility of people suffering with mental illness and being on the job. Normally, we say to ourselves that those people have unsound mind, they are at some mental institution.
Okay, so just a few things I want you to know. You see, recently we've seen a lot of globalization and global economic crisis going on. So what has happened is that companies are now looking for ways to cut back costs, and who pays for it? The workforce. So they're tending to scale down the workforce, therefore leaving more work for less people, basically, and expecting them to produce as effectively as a smaller workforce. So what happens is that this causes higher levels of stress for that workforce. This causes fear of losing the job. This causes more negative interactions at work, which may result in depression and anxiety. Now, what research has found is that about 10% of the working population has taken time off for depression, and that for every depressive episode, about 36 days in the year is lost. So when those persons do go through their depressive episodes as well, they may stay at work, and then the productivity falls. So instead of having absenteeism, you have presenteeism. Basically, they're there and they cannot work, or they cannot do the work as effectively as they could, as they should.
Is that a thing that you think, Doc, that trade unions should take into consideration? Well,
not just trade unions. I think society as a whole needs to take it into consideration, because what happens is that those persons fear seeking help because they fear stigma and discrimination. So they're afraid that if the other persons in the workplace find out that they are mentally ill, that they have depression, that they'll be seen as weak, that they'll be seen as a burden to the company and eventually fired. Or they may be discriminated, where the boss will come down harder on them to snap out of it and get on with your work.
Can such people also be ostracized by other employees,
that too,
by their co-workers?
That too.
Will that exacerbate the situation?
Definitely, because a lot of these persons, they are receiving help. For example, let's look at a situation. So you have one lady who who sees the psychiatrist or psychologist for depression, and she gets her therapy once a week after work, and she goes home and has a supportive husband and supportive family environment, and then goes to work and is afraid to talk about depression because she's hearing somebody saying, oh, these people who say they're depressed is just foolishness they're talking. It's all in the mind. And so she feels afraid of expressing what she's going through because of the fear of discrimination and the stigma attached to mental health.
How much of a threat would those people be to other co-workers if the problem is not attended to on the job?
Well, the issue with mental illness is that we have something called negative expressed emotion. So that in itself is family members or friends or co-workers being too involved in the illness. So, for example, let's say somebody is mentally ill and they go to the workplace, and because of the stigma and discrimination in the workplace, the boss or the co-workers decide that this one is mentally ill, so we have to keep a closer eye on him. So any little move he makes...
But in all honesty, shouldn't you?
Hold on, I'll get to that. So every little move he makes, we need to get him, he's not taking his medication, or he hasn't gone to his follow-up, or let's take him to the hospital because he's becoming a threat. But mentally ill persons are normal persons, like I told you. Normal persons get angry. Normal persons get anxious. Normal persons get happy. Normal persons get sad. Yes or no?
Yeah.
So then mentally ill persons, the same thing happens to them. So, for example, a lot of patients are brought to the hospital because
but isn't it
they got angry.
They will be angry to a
Not
greater degree?
Not necessarily.
They'll be out of control
Not
to a
necessarily.
greater extent?
Not necessarily. Because, for example, like I was telling you, persons are brought to the wellness center because they got angry. And when they get up there, they calm. So why they brought you here? Because this one told me something and I got angry. So they called the police for me. And is that fair? Because you're not treating the person like a human being. You're treating the person as a mentally ill thing, you could say. So
no, a human being who has mental issues, mental problems.
You're not treating the person as a human being. And that is not fair for the mentally ill persons because they should be treated like normal human beings who have emotions. Because persons with high blood pressure who get angry, anybody drags them to the hospital? Somebody with diabetes who gets angry, anybody drags them to the hospital? No. And it's a normal illness like all other illnesses. Even you have some persons who, let's say somebody is going through something that's overwhelming them and they cannot deal with it and they attempt suicide. When they go back to work, what will happen to them? They'll be looked down upon. The boss or whoever his supervisor will think, oh, this person tried to commit suicide, means he or she cannot handle emotions or cannot handle the stresses of the work. So let's send them on vacation for a little while and see what happens and maybe try and phase out there. And then that only worsens the situation with the person. So the person gets despondent and feels rejected and feels that they are a failure and it may only cause a repeat of the suicide.
And focusing on the issue of suicide, just about 3 weeks ago, over the last 3 weeks, we've had at least 2 or 3 suicides, including that involving a 16-year-old female and just over the weekend, a 57-year-old male. We'll focus on the spate of suicides we've been experiencing in St. Lucia over the last few weeks when we continue the discussion once again with Dr. Julius Gilead. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmaker Live. Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. Once again, you're watching Newsmaker Live right here on DBS Television. With me, Timothy Polion, and my guest is Dr. Julius Gilead, and he's a consultant psychiatrist. When we took the break, Doc, we're talking about suicides, and we've had our fair share of suicides in St. Lucia over the last few years. But in particular, over the weekend, we had Warren, 57-year-old, apparently committing suicide, and before that, a few weeks before that, a 16-year-old. Some people are really taking this issue very hard, this problem very hard, because it's a case of us saying to ourselves it could happen anytime soon. We could have more cases in the weeks and months ahead. How should the society deal with that problem?
Okay, so just as an interesting statistic, since 1987, that's 30 years ago, there have been 165 suicides in St. Lucia. That's
Since
an
between 1987
and now.
and now. How many? 187?
165.
165, okay.
So what happened is that's like an average of between 5 and 6 a year. Okay, so but what we have found is that since 2009, this average has increased significantly. So I think since 2009, it's either between 9 and 11. I'm not sure of the exact figure per year. So what we need to look at is the causes of that. So what used to happen before 1987 was that there was no social media and internet and all of these things. So persons were more in contact with each other. People were more in each other's faces, you could say. So you'd be walking on the street and you would greet somebody, good morning, or you had friends that you used to go play with, or you had friends you used to go hang out with. You'd come from school or you'd come from work and you'd go hang out with somebody, play dominoes, go and take a lime somewhere. But right now everything is, you could say people are becoming more detached from each other. So everything is via social media. So we don't see the persons, but we text. So we text WhatsApp and we text and we text. So this kind of human communication is not as frequent as it used to be before. So then persons, when they start to have issues that they're dealing with, they tend to feel a lot more isolated.
It is an assumption we're making because we know in this part of the world, we do not conduct the research and the studies to come up with the exact.
Yeah, so I'm being very anecdotal right now. Okay, but I think studies elsewhere are starting to show that because of the isolation of persons, that they're finding that when persons are going through those periods of overwhelming emotion, they have nobody to turn to, you could say. So they have no friend who they could go talk to and say, I'm going through this, etc., etc. Plus, because of the stigma of mental health, persons fear that they may be seen as weak, or they may be told that because of, especially in the religious circles, because of a sin that you committed, that you're paying for it, and this kind of things. And people don't want to hear that. So they feel very isolated and overwhelmed and hopeless. And then they see suicide as an attractive option.
But Doug, based on what you're saying, that this is not expected to change anytime soon, in terms of people being isolated, in terms of people looking more inward and just focusing on themselves as opposed to relying on each other or even having the time to interact with each other.
Okay, so it may not change, but then we have to deal with the situation that we're faced with.
How we deal with it?
So how do we deal with it is making the persons aware of what resources are available to them when they start feeling that way. So persons generally at present do not know that, a lot of persons don't know that there's the National Helpline. A lot of persons don't know what services that the mental wellness center offers. And so they don't know where to go. So they feel really overwhelmed, because persons who commit suicide don't just commit it, Persons who commit suicide normally, studies have shown, want help. So days before, hours before, or weeks before, the person may have been giving signs that other persons don't recognize. The person may be talking about it. The person may post something on social media. The person may jokingly say, "Boy, I feel like I will just kill myself and finish it," and so persons don't pick up these little things. Or it may be somebody who has had repeated attempts, and persons are frustrated with them and say, "This one only seeking attention," and then finally the person does it.
But are we sympathetic to each other's concerns and
that's
problems?
the issue. So persons don't take persons seriously. You find that somebody makes a comment like that, and everybody will just laugh and shrug it off. Oh, he's always happy, or she always happy. They could never do that. They're just joking, but it's a reality. So I like to tell people, anytime somebody speaks of suicide, it should be taken seriously.
But how often people make their intentions known? Not very often.
Very often. You'll be surprised. So persons, like I told you, persons may be making persons...
What, indirect statements?
Indirect statements, and that people not aware of or don't take seriously. And so it slips by. And when they look back on the days or weeks previous to the attempt or to the suicide, they will see, oh, red flag, red flag, red flag, red flag. And so what we have to do is become more aware of the red flags that these persons let out.
At the first opportunity, do you intervene? Do you start inquiring about the person's mental health, or do you, because you see, what happens very often is that people will like to keep their problems to themselves, and for a number of reasons, because they know that very often if they tell somebody, if they confide in someone, that does not remain something that is kept secret. It is spread, and that is why sometimes people keep things to themselves. They wallow in self-pity, and then now when they really cannot deal with the problem on their own, they decide to commit suicide. But at the first instance somebody's going through depression, should they seek help? Or sometimes people tell you that they're just going through a little phase.
Okay, just before I answer your question, just one thing I want to let the public know is that any mental health professional that you go to, and you let the person know what you're going through, and that person tells somebody else about it, that is a breach of confidentiality.
No, we're talking about on a so-called friend-to-friend basis.
On a friend-to-friend, okay. So on a friend-to-friend basis, yes, so that person would probably feel betrayed and only worsen the situation. But the question you ask is about how would we intervene. Yeah, so what we would do is normally persons who are going through suicidal thoughts, we talk them down. So that's what the persons at the helpline are trained to do, to talk them down, and they would code them. So if the person calls and says, I am going to commit suicide, or I have a plan and so on, then they would code them either red, yellow, or green. And so they would talk them down to a level where they would make sure that the person has adequate support, that the person may, I won't say no longer think of suicide, but then the thoughts would not be as prominent as previously. Let the person know that there is help, and that they would be getting further help after the initial contact, and basically ensuring the safety of the person. And then after that, they would refer the person to the necessary counselor or psychologist or therapist, who would be able to take the person down even lower, to get them to realize what thoughts they were having at the time, whether the thoughts were adequate or not, and what other options they have when they have those thoughts.
Is the hotline being utilized, and to what extent?
Yes, the hotline is being utilized, and I don't have the stats, but from my interaction with the staff there, they seem to get a lot of calls on a daily basis. So they do a lot of work, and
it's operating on a 24-hour basis.
Yes, 24-hour basis, and sometimes I jokingly tell them that they themselves going through a lot of stress answering all these calls, and they may need to come speak to me at times and to vent, you could say, or debrief just a lot of the emotions that they would have to take in, because somebody dealing with persons like that will have to process the person's emotions with them. And so they themselves would be under tremendous stress, and they themselves would need to be debriefed occasionally.
What are people manning the phones? Would they be counselors, psychiatrists, psychologists?
Okay, so they're trained professionals. That's all I can tell you. Okay, so because it's an anonymous system. I don't want persons to start judging and saying, okay, a psychiatrist is there, I will call. Okay, a nurse is there, I will call. If it's a normal person, I will not call. But they are trained professionals who are trained to deal with these persons and know what to say, and know how to talk the person down to a more a less dangerous act, and be able to get the person the adequate help.
But it sounds impractical that somebody who was contemplating ending their life would take the time to dial 203 to seek help.
So it's just what I said earlier on. Most persons who think of suicide want help. So the help is available, like I told you. So a lot of them give signals before, and actually a lot of them call the helpline when they see no other way out. So they probably might let the friends know, or their partner know, or their parents know. And when they realize that nobody is taking them seriously, or that everybody is rejecting them and pushing them away, making them feel worse, then the helpline would be the final options. And you have persons who, from the onset, would call the helpline because they know that option is there for them.
How do you look at the suicide situation, especially from the context of and the eyes of young people? It appears, based on the number of cases we've had and the people who are committing suicide, that every age group in St. Lucia is impacted. You've had very young people, middle-aged people, and the elderly, and for varying reasons, sometimes for health reasons. So let's look at it from the perspective of the youth. Why would, generally speaking, a young person decide to commit suicide? On what basis, generally speaking?
Okay, so all of this ties in. So let's look at it from a broad perspective. You have parents who work, so they have a child, and both parents work, and maybe one has a very challenging job, and the other one not so challenging. So one is at home more than the other, and then something happens. The child is born, the child starts to be nurtured and loved and so on, and then one parent is separated from the other parent, and so the child. No, well, actually, studies have shown that any time parents separate, when the child is before 2 years old, neural changes occur. So changes occur in the brain, where you have a release of stress hormones, which causes some changes in the brain, which causes the person to be more susceptible to overwhelming emotion and negative thoughts when they get those emotions. So, and they have difficulty controlling moods and so on. So you have that happening. The parents separate. And the child wonders, what did I do to make mommy move away? Mommy does not love me, that's why she moved away. So the child starts to have anger towards mommy, but children feel it is not practical to express anger towards the parent. So they implode, so they express the anger at themselves. So daddy is home with me, and then daddy gets a girlfriend. So then daddy no longer loves me and is giving his love to this other woman. And they get angry at daddy as well, and more anger inwards, because it's not in their nature to be angry at their parents. They see it as being impractical, basically. So then they grow up with all that anger at themselves, and then they become depressed. So the parents start seeing the child becoming hyperactive, cannot concentrate at school, always getting in fights and so on, starting to move with the wrong company because they're looking for that love that they feel their parents are not giving them anymore. And they start to move with the wrong company, and daddy starts to say, after all I've done for you, you're going with the wrong company, and you're doing this and you're doing that. But whereas they didn't see what happened earlier on. And the child moves away and becomes even worse, may become antisocial, which in psychiatry terms means disruptive and criminal and so on. And then the parents would blame the child for their behavior. I'm not blaming the parents, but I'm just saying that changes that occurred in early childhood can persist and even worsen as the child goes up. And the child has these overwhelming emotional periods where he or she cannot deal with emotions, and some of them lash out at the society, some of them lash out at themselves, and eventually one day the child decides, why am I here? This makes no sense. Mommy doesn't love me, daddy doesn't love me, nobody loves me, society doesn't love me, so the only option is to end my life. So what we do at the Wellness Center is get those persons thinking differently. So starting to see things from a different angle, because they've grown their entire lives having these core beliefs of nobody loves me. And so that's why they react in the ways that they do.
Considering that a great number of our St. Lucian children might be going through that same, reliving or going through that same experience that you just made reference to, therefore, should we have the help available in our schools?
Definitely. And I think there are counselors in the schools. I'm not sure what training those counselors have to deal with those kind of situations, but I do know that we have counselors who, when they can't deal with situations, they refer to the child psychiatrist at the Wellness Center, who is able to herself deal with the situation or refer to the psychologist if appropriate.
Let's look at suicide again from the perspective of women. Is there any difference between a woman deciding to commit suicide and a male? So
what studies have shown is that women tend to complete suicides less than men do. So women tend to take the less lethal approach to suicide. So women tend to be more, they would be the ones who would drink pills, overdose on pills, whereas men would take the more violent approach. Women go through life going through tremendous challenges. because women know, a lot of women go through childhood trauma that we're not aware of. What I found through my practice is that a lot of women go through childhood trauma, whether it be verbal trauma, whether it be physical trauma, whether it be sexual trauma, as children, and they carry these things through to adulthood. So just like in our earlier situation, nobody loves me, mommy and daddy on their own vibe, like they say, and then this stranger comes and molests me, and then the child becomes hypersexual, because that's how the child feels, that somebody who loves me will play with me down there. The child becomes hypersexual, then mommy and daddy vex that the child having sex, and then mommy and daddy gets more upset. So mommy and daddy don't love me, and they don't want anybody else to love me, and the child becomes desperate and despondent, and in the end may attempt suicide or complete suicide.
The elderly now.
The elderly go through a different issue. So elderly
So
persons,
that is what is health related?
it's not health related, but basically it's what they call existential. So the elderly go through issues to do with satisfaction with the life situation. So persons who have gone through life, had their families and so on, get to a point where either they feel satisfied with what they've accomplished, or they feel disappointed with their lives. Or it could be that the person has grown old with a partner, and then the partner dies suddenly. Or they have grown old with certain other things like possessions, and then they start to lose those possessions, or they've grown through their life being a hard worker and always been active and so on. Maybe they get a stroke, or they lose the functional abilities that they used to have before, so they feel that I am getting old and my life is at an end, and they start to ruminate about that, and they may feel desperate and despondent, and may see suicide as one of the options of just speeding up the decline that I am going through at this point.
Why are some people more likely to commit suicide than others?
Okay, the susceptibility has to do with a number of issues. So the first is the genetic susceptibility. So anybody who's had a close relative commit suicide is at a high risk of themselves committing suicide, especially if the person has a parent or a spouse who's committed suicide. These persons as well who have been separated from the parents from an early age, like I told you, they have more difficulty controlling their emotions, so they would be more prone towards committing suicide. Persons who have gone through childhood trauma are at more risk of committing suicide. Persons who have gone through a lot of rejection through their lives are at risk of committing suicide as well. In addition, you have persons who have gone through a recent loss. So somebody who recently lost a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or somebody who lost their job, or who lost a lot of money, or any other loss, may be more at risk of committing suicide. So I like to tell people that when somebody has a loss, if they start to talk about suicide, you should do something about it. So get the person help immediately, because it can become something that they take even more seriously and try to
help in what way? Help from the mental wellness
yes,
center
or the national helpline.
Mm-hmm. Based on the trend, what you're seeing,
Mm-hmm.
how serious is that problem in St. Lucia right now?
Okay, compared to other places that I have been, I do not see it as a serious problem, but it is becoming serious, because persons now I find that more persons are seeing it as a viable option. I am actually happy that this month is Mental Health Awareness Month, so that we can try to educate persons as much as possible as to the options available to them. So, because, I mean, persons always have suicidal thoughts, but I think persons are now seeing it as more attractive than before. So we're trying to teach persons that it doesn't have to be that way, that there is help, and that there is a future after this period that you're going through, and that there is hope.
Is there a need, for example, now to provide counseling to the relatives of the victims of suicide victims?
Definitely. I think any relative who has a child or a mother or any close relative or friend who has committed suicide, this person should in themselves seek help. I'm not sure how much is being done for those persons, but we at the Wellness Center cannot reach out to persons if they don't want to come. So we offer them the service that if they feel too overwhelmed by what is happening, they can come speak to us so we can refer them to somebody who can help.
How should the media report on suicides?
Well, I think the media is reporting as it should. The media does what it does. It reports. I haven't seen any media reporting on suicide that has made me think of that you all are discriminating or stigmatizing.
Because suggestions are that if you report on it, then people are exposed to the incident, and therefore they might have the inclination themselves, if they're going through some kind of problem, some kind of depression and so on, to commit suicide themselves.
Well, that has never been proven. So, I mean, I wouldn't expect the
but
media
you've heard this before?
to show the picture of somebody hanging in a roof or anything like that. But I've heard it mentioned, but I don't have any information on any article, any journal article which has proven that it happens.
With regard to our own situation in St. Lucia, do you think there's need for a study? Because people are saying, for political reasons especially, that most of the suicide cases we've experienced in St. Lucia is because of the high unemployment situation.
Yes, well, I mean, studies should be done. What I find, even when I was completing my residency, is that I was looking for studies from St. Lucia and couldn't find any. I mean, there are a couple of studies done by the WHO where they come get statistics from the Ministry of Health and they put together this report. But studies in St. Lucia, I haven't seen any. And hopefully as time goes by, myself or us or somebody else can push towards doing stuff like that, because we need studies in St. Lucia.
You're watching a Newsmaker Live, and earlier on the revelation was made by the consultant psychiatrist Dr. Julius Gilead that between 1987 and now we've had at least 165 cases of suicide in St. Lucia. The broadcast will continue in just a moment with your calls, so please stay with us. Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. Once again, you're watching Newsmaker Live on DBS Television. We'll put the telephone number on the screen right now. It's already there so that you can call with your questions and the comments for my guest. Once again, he is Dr. Julius Gilead, and he is a consultant psychiatrist. We have a caller line. Good evening. Newsmaker Live, go ahead with your contribution. I'm all right, caller. How about you?
Yes, Tim, how are you?
I am okay. How about
Fine,
you?
thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Fine, thank you.
Go ahead with your contribution.
Doctor, how are you?
I'm fine, man.
My question is, are all those who commit suicide mentally ill?
No.
Okay, thank you so much. And please, viewers, when you're calling the program, turn down the volume of your television set. So they're just going through depression, some kind of depression. They're not mentally
necessarily. So persons who commit suicide are not necessarily mentally ill, nor necessarily have a mental health issue. Statistics show about 80% of those persons do have a mental health issue. Not necessarily severe mental health and not necessarily depression, but 80% of them do have a mental health issue. The other 20% do not. So a lot of persons may commit suicide on the spur of the moment. So they would be impulsive persons, so persons who go through a situation and they cannot deal with. So it's like an acute stressor, and they act out on the spur of the moment or impulsively, and they may not intend to kill themselves but end up killing themselves.
Mm-hmm. So how do you mount... Okay, we have a call. Good evening. Newsmaker Live, you on the air?
Good evening, Tim.
Hi, good evening to you, sir.
Good evening, Doc.
Good night, sir.
Doc, how would you define or somebody who is, or identify somebody who is suicidal?
Okay.
You're talking about the warning signs, no?
No,
Yes.
I mean, because you see, to me, I'm not a professional or any such thing.
Mm-hmm.
But what I have observed is that what we really addressing is those people who are successful in the in carrying out the suicide, in a short-term sort of basis kind of thing. But to me, we're living in a society with we just scraping the surface. We live in a society with a lot of suicidal people. Doc, when somebody jumps into a vehicle and the way you see people drive on the road, obviously these people are suicidal, but we hear over and over that you must be more responsible.
Allow me to allow the doctor to respond to that, because I don't know I necessarily agree with you on that issue.
No, just let me complete on that.
Okay.
Because,
all right, go ahead.
You know, and we are told that a lot of fatal diseases are brought about through lifestyle. We go about doing the same thing, smoking, drinking, all things. We are warned against irresponsible sex. We go ahead and we do it. But perhaps these forms of suicide take a longer time, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm seeing there is that maybe, you know, much more than us in the society are suicidal, you know. But we only pay attention to those who hang themselves, who drink some poison, and so on and so forth. But we have a lot of long-term suicidal people in St. Lucia. Doc, I wish you would explain that to me.
Thank you so much for calling.
Actually, the gentleman reminded me of a conversation I was having with a patient once, somebody who smoked. So I was asking him, would you pay somebody to kill you? He told me no. So I tell him, but you smoke. He's like, what you mean, doc? I tell him, but you're paying somebody for you to kill yourself. So, I mean, I understand where he is coming from, but we cannot consider that as suicide. Suicide is intentionally taking your life with a plan or without a plan, but the intention is to take your life. Persons who smoke or drive quickly and so on, the intention is not to take them life. The intention is to have some form of pleasure from what they're doing.
Another caller line. Good evening. Go ahead, please.
Hi.
Hi. Good evening to you.
Good evening, Tim.
Good evening, ma'am.
Doc. Doc, I need to find out, is there a relation between menopause and mental health? Can somebody who's going through menopause can be mental?
Thank you so much for calling, ma'am.
I'll be listening.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, definitely. What scientists have found is that persons who go through menopause, they have a change in their hormonal balances. So what happens is that the estrogen that used to be in the body is depleted. And estrogen has an important part in what we call plasticity. So neural plasticity, the forming of nerves, and the way that nerves operate. So when that estrogen is lost, that's why persons go through the mood changes during menopause, the hot flushes and so on, because there's a drop in estrogen and it causes certain susceptibility to things like depression, anxiety especially, because they're getting the hot flushes and they feel very anxious and on edge and irritable and so on. And it may leave them susceptible to more severe mental illnesses.
Good evening. Newsmaker Live, you're on the air.
Good evening. Newsmaker Live, you're on the air.
Yeah. Okay, caller. Yeah. Can you realize what is happening, caller? The reverb? Okay, let's get off the caller. Let's get off the caller. Please, when you call, turn on the volume of your television set, because it will affect the quality of the broadcast. And of course, we've been saying this to you for years on this program and other talk shows. But we await another call once again for my guest. He is consultant psychiatrist Dr. Julius Gilead, as we continue to focus on mental health in St. Lucia. And just yesterday, the island and the rest of the world, they observed Mental Health Week. That's be Mental Health Day, and that was under the theme Mental Health in the Workplace. That was under the theme. So it's Mental Awareness Day. That was yesterday. Talking about the workplace and the challenges, is that why sometimes we hear in the United States? Okay, we have a call. Good evening, Newsmaker Live. You on the air? Who lost the call? I don't want to go into another question and then we're interrupted by another call. So let's wait to see if that call will be coming in. Good evening. Go ahead, please.
Good evening, Tim. Good evening, Doc. I would like the doctor to say something about post-traumatic stress disorder, please, because some people don't believe it's an illness and they feel you can snap out of it and so on and so forth. So could you say something on that, please? Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you. Good night, ma'am. Thanks.
Bye.
Okay, so post-traumatic stress disorder is one of the more, I would say, underdiagnosed and it's one of the illnesses that persons, like she said, don't take seriously. So what happens is that somebody goes through a tremendous stress, could be a loss, Could be that they witnessed something terrible happen to somebody. There's somebody being shot, somebody being killed in another way, somebody drowning. They may have themselves been in an accident, been the victim of a robbery or a shooting or some other trauma. They may have been in an abusive relationship and been traumatized over a period of time. So what happens to those persons is that they experience symptoms in the months after that. So they start to have nightmares of the event. Some persons actually cannot sleep because every time they close their eyes, they're basically reliving what happened to them. Some persons have those flashbacks in broad daylight, so they may be walking down the road, and all of a sudden, everything just comes back to them. They may come into contact with something or somebody who reminds them of the event, and then they would relive it again. And so they would be living in constant fear of this happening. So some persons don't want to leave the house, some persons get depressed, some persons get very angry at everybody, and so they tend to lash out a lot.
We have a call. Good evening, Newsmaker Live, you're on the air.
Yeah.
Hello, good evening.
Yeah.
Please, caller, turn on the volume of your television set, caller.
But the television is down. It's very down. It's right down.
Yes, go ahead, please.
You heard me?
Yes, go ahead.
Timothy?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I don't know the doctor name you're talking to there.
It's Dr. Gilead.
Okay. Now let me tell you something. When somebody wants to commit suicide, they will do it. Okay? They have make up their mind, they will do what they want to do. I went through something like that. I put a rope in a mango tree. I decided was to hang myself because I had a serious problem. Okay? And I sat there watching the rope. I started to pray and I asked God to protect me from that. You know what I did? I took the rope, I burned it, and that problem gone. I asked God to help me, and God helped me.
When was that, caller?
What you say?
When was that?
When was that? About 8 years ago.
Okay.
Right. And today, I put my problem behind my back, and I'm living happily. Okay? So people do what they want to do when they want to do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
So the caller just reinforced what I said earlier on. So persons who want to commit suicide always seek help. So remember I said so. So these persons always seek help before. So his help was in the form of God. So he sat down before he looked at the rope and he asked God, what should I do? So he sought help. So different persons seek help in different ways. So his way was God. Another person may be that they saw a relative and spoke to them about it or mentioned it a pastor. Another person may call the helpline. So different persons seek help from different sources.
Do you have another call? Hello, good evening. This is Newsmaker Live. Hello, good evening. Go ahead, please.
Okay, good evening, Tim.
Hi.
With your guest, Dr. Gilead.
Good evening to you, caller.
Good evening. All right. Tim, when it comes to suicide, look at that. Huh? Like the last caller said there, you see people that have the heart to do that to themselves. I mean, you have to pray, man. You have to pray. Because prayer is strong. Before you do that, to take off your life on earth, I mean, you have to pray. When you pray, as if like that old mind come from your spirit, and it makes you change to think different. You understand? And from there to there again, and I see that people that have them kind of problem, the families and friends, they can see a change within these people. They can talk to that person, and said, hey, why are you looking so? Why are you behaving so? Tell me something. You wasn't so before. And there is certain ways that you can ask people questions instead of something happen. We must not wait until something happens to see a change within human beings, because we all are human beings, and we can see and we know that we doesn't know, everything within at all humankind, but you can see a change, and there is ways that we can talk to persons that we don't see that that's not the way they was looking like before, that's not the way their attitude, their behavior was looking like before, and from there to there you can take sense out of nonsense, and just there is ways that you can give them ideas, advice, and from there to there you can see that.
Hello? Okay, we have lost the caller. Yes, caller, you still there? Okay. All right. Thank you so much for calling. But it isn't every instance that we would think that the person is about to commit suicide. In every situation where they come across as being depressed, does it mean that that person automatically will commit suicide?
No, it's not. So the WHO actually has an ad where they have 43 seconds and they tell you things you can do. Just speak to the person. Whether they want to commit suicide or not, a lot of persons who are depressed just want somebody to speak to. They don't want you to judge what they're going through or tell them what to do. They just want to vent.
We have a call. Good evening. Go ahead, please.
Timothy, I am there again.
Yes, sir.
When somebody wants to do something in their mind, no mother, no father, no brother, no sister cannot know what they want to do. They go and do their thing quietly by themselves. So I don't want people to say people must help you to do something bad. If you're going to plan something bad, the only way they can help you is if you go and tell your mother, your father, your brother, or sister, you're going to do that. They will tell you, don't do it. Okay? People go and commit suicide because they want to do it. They will tell nobody and they will do it. Okay? Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, and have yourself a very good evening. And we do not want to hear from you again, okay, caller? 2 calls and that's it. But we do appreciate your contribution. But, Doc, you need to counter exactly what he's saying there.
Well, the thing about it, the gentleman went through an experience, and it looks like he wants to share his experience with everybody. I don't think we can discount what he went through. So he was overwhelmed at one time.
But he's speaking from his perspective and shouldn't be generalizing.
No, I don't think he's generalizing. I think he sees himself as being somebody who conquered suicide. I think the advice he's offering to persons is genuine. And I think persons who are going through suicide should take his advice because he conquered suicide.
Okay. We have a call. Good evening. Newsmaker Live, you're on the air.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening to you, sir.
Tim, listening to the callers' contributions, right? And there's something I'm listening for and I'm not hearing it. Doc, there's psychiatric drugs people take that have suicide thoughts, side effects, right? They advertise that all the time. Even the FDA made it compulsory that you list, I think, about 12 side effects of certain drugs. And the media don't say, or people don't come out and say, if these people who committed suicide were on any particular form of medication that had these side effects. A lot of people talk about the devil and religion and all that, but that part, the medical part of it, nobody speaks about it. Okay? I don't know if you could shed some light on that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. So the drugs that do have the side effects are what we call antidepressants. So these antidepressants have been shown to have that the persons have suicidal thoughts or maybe a slight increase in suicidal thoughts, but that occurs mainly in teenagers. Okay. So what has been found is that maybe 0.1% of teenagers who take those drugs may think about suicide. I don't think I've read any studies which show that these teenagers actually complete suicide. Understand? So what a lot of researchers after that have tried to find out is who commits suicide who was on antidepressants and not, I don't know of any articles which has found that. So what the argument they put in forward is that the benefit outweighs the risk greatly. So persons who benefit from suicide. So what they find is that persons who are on these drugs who have suicidal ideations or suicidal thoughts like we call them, these persons' suicidal thoughts tend to decrease with those drugs. So you have a small number of persons, 0.1%, who may have an increase in suicidal thoughts, but they don't commit suicide. So the benefit of the drugs, it tends to outweigh the risk tremendously. Yes, the patients should be informed of the risk of having suicidal thoughts, and the relatives should be informed as well. And the patient, through the first month of treatment on these drugs, should be informed of those risks, because the risk occurs between 2 weeks and a month of being on these drugs. After that, the risk decreases tremendously.
Why is that?
Because of what we call neuroplasticity. So the brain normally responds to those drugs during that time. Before that time, you may find the depressive symptoms may not decrease too much, but after that time, the symptoms start to decrease if the person has a positive reaction to the drug, and then the person starts to get benefits from that drugs. But before that time, you may or may not see benefits from the drugs.
Once again, we continue to take your calls. Do we have a call? This is Newsmaker Live. Hello, good evening. Go ahead, please. Hello. Okay, we have lost that call. Our people over in Dominica, our fellow Caribbean nationals in Dominica, what they went through there, considering the toll that it took on the country and, of course, on them, the helplessness, the trauma, the desperation, the despair. Do you think that Dominica is a country that is certainly in need of assistance with regard to ensuring that people receive the necessary counseling?
Definitely, and I think I'm also seeing volunteers going over for that purpose. So I think there was a mental health mission that left recently or is leaving soon. Because I think persons...
What, from St. Lucia?
Yes, from St. Lucia. So persons have been traumatized tremendously because you have your house, and in Dominica's case, it would be loss that they will be going through. So a lot of persons are going through loss, and they would need help to deal with that loss, because a lot of them will not know how to deal and will not know where what is going to happen in the future. So,
but can those people recover mentally?
Yes, of course. Mental illness, like I said, is an illness, and persons recover from illnesses, so they can recover.
Okay. Normally people turn to, for example, to alcohol and to drugs when they go through such problems. How do you ensure that you help them so that they do not go down that particular path, which certainly could be a treacherous one?
You're talking about Dominicans?
Dominicans.
Okay, so...
Or in general, when people go through depression.
Yes, so persons who go through mental illness tend to take different paths in order to try to deal with it. So, like I like to teach, there are two reactions to stress. There's a fight or flight response. So those persons who tend to drink or try to take other activities which will distract them from the stress, that's the flight response that they're using. And in most cases they would suppress the symptoms that they're having, which is not a healthy activity.
We have a call. Good evening. This is Newsmaker Live. You're on the air. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Good evening to you, sir. You're on the air.
Yes. Good night to you, Kim.
Good night to you, sir.
Good night, Doc.
Good night, sir.
Okay. Just want to know. I have a family member that went through a trauma, and currently she likes to stay by herself and not being socialized with anybody. And by telling her that she's not alright, she's telling you she's okay. I need to know what exactly you should do with that person.
Okay, you could listen via your television set, caller. Yeah. All right, thank you so much.
Okay, so a lot of persons who go through mental health issues tend to withdraw, because a lot of times the persons who they encounter tend to judge them. So telling somebody that something is wrong with them, right away you're being judgmental. So persons don't want to be don't want to be criticized for what they're going through. If the person's functioning is affected, then that should become a concern. So we're looking at social functioning. That means the person's relationships at home and work. We're looking at occupational functioning. That is the person's productivity at work. And you were looking at, if the person is at school, a school functioning. So as long as the functioning is affected, then the family member can approach the person and tell them, I realize that you're not behaving, you're not as chirpy as you used to be, not as cheerful as you used to be, you're not as interactive as you used to be. And I know you may say that nothing is wrong, but it is troubling to us and to the family, and I think we should go speak to somebody about it.
Let's take our final call. Good evening. Newsmaker Live, you're on the air.
Is an introvert a mental disability?
Okay, thank you so much.
No, introversion is not a mental disability. So anybody can be an introvert. Introversion can as well be a symptom of different mental illnesses. But anybody can be an introvert, and that person can function normally in the society.
Are all of us going through some kind of mental situation?
Well, the thing about it, Tim, is that stress is constant. So all of us go through stresses throughout the day, every day. And but the problem is the way we react to that stress. What I like to say is the perception of the person of the stress. So you may walk out of the studio tonight and find your car broken into or stolen. And you may decide that's no big deal. But somebody else walks out of the workplace and finds their car broken into or stolen. It may affect them tremendously. They may be traumatized by the situation. They may fear buying another car because it might be stolen again. They may fear that somebody is coming after them, that somebody is out to get them for some reason. And so it may affect them in a different manner because of the perception that they have of what happened.
The fact that life comes with the fair share of challenges, do you think that we have reached the critical juncture or the stage where we should prepare our children mentally to cope with those issues, yes, which are inevitable?
Yes,
even ourselves.
What I find is that right now in 2017, and a lot of persons tend to look back on what occurred in the 80s or the 70s. And so they
somehow they look at the positives, exactly, because they were negatives as well.
Yes. Yeah. So a lot of persons say, oh, in that time we used to do it so. But in that time there was no internet, there was no social media, and persons need to now try to embrace what is happening. So there's social media and internet. How do we deal with that with our children growing up? So parents, how much time do you spend with your children? At dinner time you're texting. Let's go to the beach, you're on the beach texting. Let's go to the cinema, you're in the cinema texting. How much time do you spend with your children? So that is an important aspect of society right now. How much time do parents spend with the children? And because in our time, yes, we used to, maybe people say, my mother never tell me she loved me, or my father never tell me he loved me, but the parents were spending time with you. You all used to go to the beach, you all used to go in the country during vacation, and so you'll spend time together. But right now the parents are not spending time with the children as they should.
Final comments from you, Doc?
Well, this month is Mental Health Awareness Month, and we're trying to focus on mental health in the workplace. So what we're trying to do is find out the options that are available to persons, to employees and to employers, on how to improve the mental health awareness in the workplace. So we're trying to focus on employees, concentrating more on their self-care, on their job satisfaction, on exercising more leisure activities, so that when they come to work they feel better inside. And employers as well contributing by maybe having more activities that make the workers feel that they appreciated, basically, and not making them fear being stigmatized if they have a mental health issue. Maybe employers can as well do more research into mental health and how they can incorporate the discussion of it in the workplace, so that persons feel more comfortable speaking about this kind of things.
Dr. Gilead, thank you so much for being my guest on this evening's Newsmaker Live. As always, thank you so much for watching the broadcast and contributing via your calls. If it's Wednesday, it's Newsmaker Live. Time now for the clip that peaked.
Yeah.